would essentially put the whole GMO food venture into a death spiral right there, a tailspin. It could not survive that. That would be very simple. So, but there are other, past president, Bill Clinton, if he read it, he'd realize, he admits he was one of the biggest boosters of genetic engineered food. And he said, if anybody can show me, there's a quote that I have from him in the book, if anybody can show me good reason why I should change my mind, I will. Well, my book will give him dozens of good reasons, and he's a highly intelligent man too. So if he realizes he was made into a cheerleader for the biotech industry based on having been lied to by many eminent scientists, I think he'd be a bit outraged as well. And we know Bill Clinton is a very eloquent communicator, as is President Obama. So there are many, many avenues of ending this very quickly. It's why it's so vulnerable. Okay, to get back to your question, precautionary principle is supposed to be the foundation of European Union food safety law too. You can find several statements of the European Commission to that effect. They have completely turned their back on the precautionary, I don't know if I'd say completely, but I'd say almost completely turned their back on the precautionary principle when it comes to genetically engineered foods. And again, my book shows many instances in which the European Food Safety Agency has been almost as bad as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So again, the principle of upholding the precautionary principle, which is on the books, formally stated, in practice is not being followed in the European Union. If it had been followed, that probably would have been the end of the whole venture too. My book talks about the Australia-New Zealand Food Authority, which is now called Food Safety Australia-New Zealand. Back when I dealt with them, they had the earlier name. I know about what the shenanigans they pulled very well because I had a long meeting with them. I sent them information showing where they had misstatements in publications going to the public. They didn't change it for a long time. They didn't change their policies. I presented them information from the FDA's files. By the way, just something interesting, even though the policy didn't change, when I met with the chief scientist, the head of biotechnology, and the chief of food standards for a couple hours, actually one day in 2001 in their offices in Canberra, I said to them at one point after I gave them the information, the highlights from the FDA memos, I said to the chief scientist, just tell me what would have happened if in 1992, instead of announcing the food policy on GMOs that the FDA did announce, the FDA had have said, our scientists have done a major study. They've concluded that genetic engineering is different than traditional breeding. The foods it creates entail a different set of risks. They all have to go through careful safety testing. I said, what would have happened? She said very quickly, without thinking about it, it would have killed the whole thing. That's in the book. And by the way, I sent her an email confirming she said that. And I said, if you disagree with this, please send me an email. She never did. That's what she did say, and that's what would have happened. And she is a biotech booster, or certainly favorable. Let me go back to that. She and her agency certainly seem to be favorable to genetically engineered foods. And for her to say that was rather dramatic. But that's because that's what would have happened if the FDA had told the truth, if it would have been over. If any of these food regulatory agencies had actually spoken as scientists and upheld their spoken responsibly, it would have been over. And the reason they didn't is why we're here today. It's why I'm talking to you, why I had to spend many years writing a book. I wouldn't have had to do that if the FDA had spoken honestly from the beginning. So, has that answered your question well enough? Okay, good. I should probably have somebody else be fielding questions because I'm not watching the room the way all of... So you're going to do it? Okay, good. So who's next?
Sí, está bien.
Am I correct that we have the room until noon? Am I correct that we have the room until noon? Okay.
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Andrés Carballo. Gracias por esta visión tan completa del momento que estamos viviendo como humanidad. En varios momentos de sus comentarios, tocamos un punto que tiene que ver con el comportamiento humano. Cuando nosotros como humanos cometemos un error, no queremos aceptarlo generalmente y lo escondemos. Entonces, con la visión tan completa que tiene usted como investigador de este momento histórico de la ciencia y de la humanidad, donde hemos sabido que la ciencia ha cometido muchos errores y también muchos avances, en este momento no quiere reconocer, o un sector no quiere reconocer sus errores. Quizás, y es una suposición mía, quizá por eso está usted en Costa Rica en este momento, para ver uno de los lugares del mundo con la mayor biodiversidad, en un lugar tan pequeño. Cuando Vandana Shiva estuvo por acá en esta misma universidad, nos decía que en un lugar con tanta biodiversidad, el monocultivo debería ser un crimen. Hablando ya de estrategias, hay una estrategia, usted decía que los organismos genéticamente modificados perderán la batalla. Una estrategia de oposición es buena, pero también corremos el riesgo de ser calificados como punks, así como usted nos decía. ¿Cuál sería la estrategia, no de oposición, sino de apoyar qué tipo de proyectos o qué tipo de ingeniería o de biotecnología podríamos estar apoyando en este momento como humanidad?
Okay. Good. Let me begin by certainly acknowledging, as you said, we humans have difficulty recognizing and acknowledging our mistakes, and it's even more difficult, it seems, to actually learn from them, even if we acknowledge them. And I mean, we all do that. I know that I have a tendency to not want to face up to my mistakes either. But I did mention software engineering before, and I think we can hold that up as an example of a branch of engineering and human endeavor that, by and large, learned that it needs to learn from its mistakes. And I discuss in the book, when I contrast software engineering from so-called genetic engineering, the dramatic difference between the two areas, because software engineers learned the hard way that they couldn't presume that they could revise complex systems and just that there would be no unintended side effects. And they've taken that into account when there have been disasters. They've investigated. They've learned better ways of programming to try to make their systems more resilient to unintended consequences in the first place. They've learned that even designing in safeguards still cannot eliminate all of the unexpected consequences, but they've learned and their discipline has become much more in line with reality and much safer over the years. In contrast, the genetic engineers have consistently hidden all of the problems and often loosened safety requirements. They've gone just the opposite. My book shows that. So in a sense, not only are they failing to acknowledge errors, they're refusing to, they pretend they don't even exist, that there's nothing they need to learn from. It's a very, very sorry situation. And again, people doing it need to they have to be made ashamed of themselves, really, because it's just bad behavior, and they're subjecting the health of hundreds of millions of human beings and the health of the environment to grave risks that shouldn't happen. To get to your second question, what kind of technology can we actually support? It's very clear that agroecological alternatives, safe, sustainable agriculture that's in line with nature, that doesn't intervene in dangerous ways, that works in harmony with nature. And it's difficult, I think, and again, we have some experts here who can follow up on what I say better than I, but what will work in any particular niche, any particular ecosystem, we have to be sensitive to that. Not every approach will work everywhere, so we have to learn from nature too, work harmoniously with our natural surroundings, but we know what won't work. We know that recombinant DNA technology is against the ways of nature. It's going to create foods that are unreasonably risky, impose unreasonable risks on the environment. So that is not an option. That's not part of sane, sensible agroecological techniques. There are many studies that have been done, and one I think just recently came out, again, consistently showing that what is needed certainly in the developing world are small farms, agroecologically balanced, primarily organic, if we can, and not necessarily always certified organic, which is expensive, but following those principles, biodynamics. There's so many different names for different techniques, but I think, and perhaps Dr. Garcia and his colleagues have identified what are the very specific techniques that count as safe, sustainable agroecological techniques, and you and your colleagues probably have too. So I should yield the floor to either both of you if you want to go on what I'm saying, but we know what should be avoided. Synthetic herbicides and insecticides, and we need to minimize the use of synthetic fertilizers, which are not the answer. And we need to, the soil, I know in the United States and many industrialized worlds, it's on life support. The soil no longer can support plants. Basically, the soil is just there as a medium to put water into and to put synthetic fertilizer into and to put herbicides and insecticides into. And the crops coming out of that, and again, they aren't filled with life, and the nutrients aren't as rich, and certainly that's unsustainable. It's unsustainable on many levels. So what we have to do is learn to develop sustainable method of producing food that will give the most joy to the producer. It will bring back the role of the farmer as steward of the land, not as exploiter of the land, and then it'll be more a joy to farm again. It'll be safer too. The farmer and his family won't be subjected to all of these carcinogenic and otherwise toxic sprays that are going on. It'll be a happier situation for everybody. And so I'm going to, do you want to add to that, or do you want to add to that? Because this is really about your field, not mine.
Sí, pero no creo que sea el momento. Mejor aprovechamos su tiempo, que es muy limitado, porque el doctor Druker va a estar aquí hasta hoy. Él va a regresar. Yo estoy a sus órdenes y podemos tratar ese tema en otra ocasión.
Okay.
Vamos a pasar con otra pregunta.
Actually, okay.
Thank you for coming. I believe in 1987 or 1988, the then president of Costa Rica invited the world's top expert in dietary safety to come to Costa Rica to give a speech. His name was Michio Kushi.
Oh.
He at that time said that Costa Rica could become the first real macrobiotic country, meaning organic farming. Since that time, we've had the multinational food purveyors come and buy many of our companies in agriculture and food production. Unlike your country of the United States, any one citizen can go to the Sala Cuarta here to make a demand and be heard, okay, against genetically modified foods. The only thing that one of these professors has to do is immediately go to our Supreme Court and make a demand to stop this. We don't have to rely on Obama or Congress or anybody else. My question is, which political party is supporting you in stopping this today?
Well, I don't think we should talk about a political party supporting me. I should because I want to say it accurately, the party and the position, I should let Dr. Garcia, he was at the meeting too. They are a political party, and they may be the only one yet, that my understanding has taken a formal position or is about to, opposing GMOs. But I want to be accurate in what is said, so I'm going to but they're not like supporting what I'm doing directly, but they are in line with what I'm saying. But because I'm hoping that every political party here will be supporting what I'm saying, and I consider myself an ally of every political party until I learn otherwise.
Sí, bueno, básicamente en el país, para tener claridad, o sea, hay dos partidos que abiertamente están apoyando el proyecto de ley de moratoria, que es el Frente Amplio y el Partido de Acción Ciudadana. Aunque a mí me parece, por lo que he visto, que no todos los diputados de estas dos fracciones tienen claridad sobre este tema, ¿verdad? Porque están igualmente influenciados, porque a ellos ya les han llegado a hacer lobby, ¿verdad?, de que esto es una maravilla, que los transgénicos son una maravilla, etcétera, entonces les da miedo. Y más cuando llevan personas, ¿verdad?, de la Academia de Ciencias o científicos de la universidad que dicen que no se debe apoyar este proyecto de moratoria. O sea, los políticos son políticos y son altamente influenciables. Y la experiencia mía es que realmente ellos no atienden muchas veces a la prueba documental que uno mismo les ha llevado. Pues habrá que seguir luchando, ¿verdad? Pero esa es la situación tal y como yo la veo en este momento y como se ha expresado abiertamente por parte de esos dos partidos, ¿verdad? Por escrito, no solo de palabra. El señor quiere aquí hacer una pregunta.
Before the next question, I just realized I personally thanked Randall Tolpenrud, and at the beginning I did express gratitude generally for being able to have this wonderful facility for this event. But I actually would like to personally thank the Dean of the Medical School for really allowing this to happen here. So if you could stand up so that people could also thank you, because I appreciate what you've done. Thank you very much. In the United States, it would be a very bold step for a dean of the medical school to give me a forum like this, and it may be a courageous step here too. I hope, but again, I'm very, very grateful.
Muy bien, buenos días todavía. Doctor, gracias por estar en Costa Rica y traernos información tan valiosa y reformular y reactivar los conocimientos que ya los científicos de Costa Rica están avanzando y que en conjunto con bases sólidas y comprobatorias podamos juntos realmente apoyar proyectos que eliminen este tipo de alimentos o influencia nociva para la salud. Mi nombre es Julio Sánchez, yo soy especialista en fitomedicina y tengo dos preguntas puntuales. Una pregunta es, a través de la información de los transgénicos en relación a la polinización y otras cosas, me preocupa mucho, o nos preocupa a las personas que trabajamos con esto, la transgénesis en plantas medicinales. Por ejemplo, la manzanilla, la camomila. O sea, ¿qué alteraciones y cómo podemos a nivel de laboratorio hacer las comprobaciones científicas de que hay alteraciones? Sé que se ha dirigido todo a la alimentación, pero hoy en el mundo ha habido una necesidad y una comprobación científica del uso medicinal de las plantas sin necesidad de hacerles transformaciones químicas puntuales o alopáticas. Esa sería la primera pregunta. O sea, resumiendo, ¿qué examen de laboratorio podemos hacerles a las plantas o a los alimentos para demostrar que están alteradas genéticamente?
There are tests that can be performed to find out if certain foods contain ingredients from GMOs, and they're very sensitive. They can be determined down to a very to basically less than, or down to about 1/10%, because that's the standard of labeling in the EU if there is a, I believe, 0.9, if there's a tenth of a percent of GMO contamination, then that food has to be labeled. I believe that's correct. Isn't that right? Anyway, it's very low. If I had that wrong, I'm sorry, but it's certainly under 1%. So I don't know specifically what those tests are. There are testing laboratories that can do that. I was asked before questions about, I think you mentioned chamomile, or did I hear that wrong or something? But there are many plants that people think might have been subject to change transformation through recombinant DNA technology that have not been done. So the first thing is just to be clear on what are the plants that you could have a reasonable concern might have been, save the money, and make sure that the testing is just focused on the organisms that you think might have been reconfigured. And we know which organisms have been commercialized that are, and Dr. Garcia has written papers on that. And we know many of the organisms that are in the testing phase, and I think it's fairly easy to find out, is there any real risk that some of those have already come into the borders of the country. And in that way, you save the testing for the organisms that really require it the most. And then there are testing labs, I know that there are testing labs operating somewhere in Central and or South America, and it's just a matter of engaging them. And I don't know that much about it, but I'm sure that's easily determined. Do you want to add to that, Dr. Garcia?
Sí, aquí tenemos laboratorios con capacidad de hacer ese tipo de análisis en la Universidad de Costa Rica y en el Instituto Tecnológico de Costa Rica, hasta donde tengo conocimiento. Bien, y tenemos que ir terminando lamentablemente. Agradecerles, pero antes de agradecerles formalmente al presidente de la Fundación Pax Natura, como al doctor Druker, su presencia aquí en el país, quiero comunicarles que para aquellos de ustedes que tengan interés en este tema, me pueden escribir a esta dirección, donde les puedo enviar el programa de un seminario que todos los primeros semestres de mes la Universidad de Costa Rica ofrece de manera abierta y gratuita. No hay que matricularse, solo se llega, donde se tienen invitados de diferentes ramas, filósofos, nutricionistas, de diferentes áreas que hablan sobre este tema con mayor profundidad, que es un tema muy amplio, como ustedes vieron, con muchas aristas. Entonces, con mucho gusto yo les puedo enviar ese seminario, así como información actualizada sobre estos temas, cuando vengan los libros en español o en inglés, con mucho gusto. Es un listado de casi 1000 personas los que tenemos en este momento, pues ahí yo estoy enviando información regular al respecto. Lo mismo, estoy en la mejor disposición de ir a hablar sobre estos temas en cualquier lugar que se me invite, donde haya un grupo organizado que quiera oír al respecto. Les agradecemos su atención y un fuerte aplauso, por favor, para nuestros invitados.